Right, the first thing I'm going to tell you to do is please don't start with the extract. I know the exam question says starting with the extract, but there's nothing in the mark scheme which says you need to do that, but there is something in the mark scheme which says you'll get into trouble if you don't. And that is you have to write a coherent argument. Well, what does a coherent argument mean? It means you start off with an idea that you present at the beginning of your essay, which you then develop as you go through. Well, if you start with the extract, you won't be able to develop an argument. You'll be starting at the wrong point in the play. You will see why that is such brilliant advice in this video. Let's start with the question. So we have to show how Shakespeare presents the attitudes of Macbeth and Banquo to the supernatural. Our introduction I call the thesis statement. In your thesis statement, you lay out 3 things that Shakespeare is trying to do. Number 1, as you know, he's trying to ingratiate himself with King James, who believed in the power of the supernatural, who believed in witchcraft, and therefore he introduces 3 witches into the play. Secondly, he is writing a tragedy that's going to be performed at the court of King James with all the other nobles present. These are highly educated men who will know all the conventions of Greek tragedy. And so Shakespeare plays with that expectation and takes who in tragedy dictate when the hero will die, and he reimagines them as the 3 weird sisters. Now this is very cunning because the fates do not cause the hero's death. And so automatically those educated nobles know that the witches may not cause Macbeth's death, may not cause his downfall. And this is vital because it is the individual who is responsible for their actions. That, in this case, is a noble, Macbeth, who commits regicide, killing Duncan. And obviously this is a didactic play in which Shakespeare is telling all the nobles present, whatever you do, however much you don't like King James because he's Scottish, because he's homosexual, because he's not Elizabeth I, don't kill him because God has put him there, and you will go to hell if you kill this king. So the third reason in the thesis is about the individual having to take responsibility for their actions, because this individual represents the nobles in the audience, who might be thinking evil thoughts. That's me with a dagger, by the way, in case you're getting worried. Okay, now I've got some planning time in the exam, and I'm going to write my ideas down as quickly as possible. You will see on the side, I don't know which side it's going to be yet, me writing my ideas down in a bit more detail. In the exam, you're just using 5 minutes maximum to plan, so you're writing briefly and quickly, and I'm aiming to have about 8 points that I can argue in my beautiful argument that's going to persuade the examiner to give me the grade 9. So the first thing I think of about Macbeth is that he instantly listens to the weird sisters' prophecies and starts imagining killing the king. Whereas, point 3, Banquo listens to the same kind of prophecies of the future, and his thoughts don't turn to killing the king. Instead, Banquo warns Macbeth about supernatural instruments trying to win us to our harm. Now, this will link back to the idea of the fates. In Greek tragedy, the hero does everything to try and avoid their fate because they hear about it, and then everything that they do inevitably leads to that fate coming about. So in Banquo's understanding of Greek tragedy, your safest bet is not to act. And by not acting, you're at least not responsible for losing your personal integrity and giving in to your hamartia. So if Banquo's hamartia is ambition, wanting to become king himself, he doesn't give in to that at all. He thinks, no, I'll wait, my son will become king, cool. My son's sons will become king, super cool. Whereas Macbeth doesn't think, I'm going to become king, cool. He thinks, kill, 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 kill. Kill. Now, point 4, I absolutely love, because many people argue about whether or not it's the witches, the weird sisters, that cause Macbeth to kill Duncan. And I think I've already shown that's not what's going on here. But the other thing is, Macbeth would have got away with this killing if he hadn't killed Banquo. Why do I say that? Well, Banquo becomes the supernatural figure when he returns as a ghost, and he shakes his gory locks at Macbeth, prompting Macbeth to say, "Never shake thy gory locks at me." Fine. "Thou canst not say I did it." Not fine. Because all the nobles in the audience don't know Banquo is dead. They only know Duncan is dead. So they assume Macbeth is confessing to killing Duncan, and from that moment the nobles begin to turn against him, begin to desert him and go to England in search of Malcolm to return to kill Macbeth, cut off his head, put it on a stake, and seal Macbeth's fate. And that all happens because Banquo's ghost arrives at the feast. And so by taking action on the Weird Sisters' words, Macbeth has sealed his fate, not just by killing Duncan, but by killing his friend Banquo. This, of course, links back to my thesis idea that the play is a warning against individual nobles in the audience from committing regicide, because that is taking an action to change your fate, and these actions inevitably bring about the fate you don't want, is Shakespeare's message. Now, if I'm not a fast writer, I'm nearly at the end of my essay. But if I am a fast writer, I can go on to point 5. And this is that Macbeth ignores the evidence of his own experience. So he obviously realises that his meltdown after seeing Banquo's ghost has led to this distrust from the nobles. But instead of getting political about it and thinking, okay, I'm going to have to get the nobles on side, he doubles down on committing further acts which will get him into trouble. How do we know that? He deliberately seeks out the supernatural power of the Weird Sisters again, and he revisits them to find out further truths which will cause him to take the wrong actions again. So they tell him to beware Macduff, and what does he do? Slaughters the whole of Macduff's family, which then gives Macduff the motivation to come back and kill him. Point 6, I'm going to argue that Shakespeare also uses Macbeth and Banquo and their different reactions to the supernatural to indicate that as individuals we have power. Now this is different from a normal Greek tragedy. In a Greek tragedy, whatever the hero does, they cannot escape their fate. However, in this play, Shakespeare keeps dropping hints that if Macbeth had simply behaved differently, he could have got away with it. He could have become king without killing Duncan. Now, Shakespeare also wants to give this a Christian context, and so he uses the supernatural to suggest that any thoughts the nobles might be having about getting rid of King James are inspired by Satan. So he posits the idea to them that, look, if you've ever thought about getting rid of the king, that is evidence alone that Satan is working his way into your mind and that your soul, if it's here, is vulnerable to eternal damnation. And the way he does that is by giving this interesting line to Banquo, "Last night I dreamed of the Weird Sisters." Because what this implies is that Banquo has also had thoughts about how Fleance might become king. He himself might have thought about killing Macbeth. But by saying to Macbeth, look, the witches have been in my mind, he's telling Macbeth, look, we can resist the thoughts that Satan gives us. Why does Banquo do that? Well, because he knows Macbeth. He knows Macbeth's satanic thoughts will be, right, I've got rid of the king, but then the witches said Banquo's sons will be king. Gonna have to get rid of Fleance, and then what if Banquo has more sons? I could chop off his private parts, or I could kill him. Which one would I like to do most? Kill him! So my 8th point is going to be my conclusion normally, and I'm going to return to the idea that this is a didactic play, propaganda to influence the nobles, to park those thoughts of getting rid of King James, naughty, naughty, you will go to hell. But it is also a way to ingratiate himself with King James further. He knows King James is passionate about the witches, like in real life. Not passionate in a sexual way, passionate that they exist and that they must be killed. And you could finish there, but I'm going a little bit further because I really like the idea that Shakespeare doesn't believe in the power of the supernatural and he doesn't believe in witches. which is why he gives Macbeth this line about life being a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. He's actually turned against God by calling God an idiot. In other words, he's lost his faith. And in Shakespeare's time, losing your faith was the equivalent to losing your soul. So ultimately, I'd be arguing that a belief in the supernatural power of the witches is something that Macbeth himself rejects, because the witches never cause Macbeth to do anything. It's all internal motivation. But obviously he can't spell that out directly because King James is there saying, "Kill the witch, kill the witch, kill the witch." So that's my point 9, which is more than 8 points, and you might not want to put it into your conclusion because you might think, Mr. Salles, you've blown my mind, I don't know what you're talking about, leave me alone. Once you've worked out the brilliant sequence of your plan, it is now time to go to the extract and see what will fit the plan. So I can instantly spot, "But 'tis strange, and oftentimes to win us to our hearts, the instruments of darkness tell us truths." So that links to point 3. Banquo warning Macbeth about the supernatural. Next we have, "Why do I yield to that suggestion whose horrid image doth unfix my hair?" That was point 2. Macbeth immediately thinking about killing the king. And "Shakes so my single state of man" links to point 7, thinking about the role of the individual and the preservation of his Christian soul. Now I can put details from the extract where they make sense in my essay and my fantastic argument that's going to get a grade 9. Now there is a fantastic chance that Macbeth might appear in your exam, so why not watch the video on Macbeth coming up now? Or is it over there? Maybe I'll put myself upside down. Life is full of possibilities.